So now we're going to Torino.
Okay, I will focus mainly on the first 2 points of the presentation of Christian. That means image building and assets. And I want to share with you some stories about my hometown, that is Turin. And particularly, I would like to discuss with you how development strategies and image building in Turin has been connected to what I call politics of visibility. That means playing with the boundary between what is visible and what is invisible. I will not spend my time in discussing the theoretical aspects, but if you want, we can do that later, and I will mainly stick to my case study. This is an old postcard from Turin. You know, once, a long time ago, postcards used to be considered important cultural products in order to detect the image of the city, long before Instagram. And here you find the main idea or stereotype connecting Turin, putting Turin in the world map. That is car manufacturing. A common play when you are outside of your hometown is to see which kind of keywords people more commonly associate with your city. And in my case, when I discuss about Turin, when I'm outside of Turin, most people connect Turin to Fiat, the car manufacturer, or Juventus, the football team. Just once in my life, a colleague of mine told me, a very intellectual one, told me, well, that's the city where Nietzsche went crazy for a horse, you know. But really, one time in my life. This is the typical image, important visual reference to the city. You see the Mirafiori production plant, we'll discuss about that later, a car, and the one below is the main square in the city, which is full of cars in this picture. Right now, I will come to that, it's a pedestrian street, totally in line with the kind of Florida creative city visions of the city. Now, Turin is an interesting case study for people dealing with urban studies because you can tell a number of different stories concerning the evolution of Turin. You can tell a story of industrialization, deindustrialization, urban regeneration, creative city policies, mega events, because we hosted the Winter Olympic Games in 2006. Which are a smaller event than the Summer Olympic Games, but a huge one for a city of the size of Turin, which is 1,002,000 for the metropolitan area. And we have a story, as many other cities, of economic crisis, particularly since 2010, and smart city vision and development strategies. But right now, I want to present the evolution of the image of Turin over the last years in terms of politics of visibility. My thesis is, quite obviously, there is a very selective storytelling on the basis of the construction of the image of the Turin. In different political, economic, contingent situated periods, you have that some things has been made visible, some other things has been made invisible, playing with this kind of boundary, which is a highly political exercise, which is very much connected to issues of power, I will not discuss here, produce the kind of outcome I will present you. Now, just a couple of ideas about Turin. The identity of Turin is deeply connected to ideas with industrial culture, let's call that. Most of the city grew up after at the beginning of the previous century because of the growth of Fiat, large immigration flows. That's a typical story of a one-company town. Car manufacturing is really embedded in, let's say, stereotypes about the inhabitants. I don't know if you know that, but people from Turin are supposed to be hard, good workers. And historical events, the first working class movements come from Turin. That's a city Gramsci is strongly connected to Turin, the economic specialization, the urban landscape itself, the landscape hold the signs of the industrial past of the city. And even economic specialization, I would say, is still highly connected to industry. Turin is still heavily an industrial city. Not Fordist anymore, but still industrial. Because, you know, the kind statistical data are developed, most cities are specialized in the service sector, having that about 1/3 of the people working in the city works in the manufacturing sector is a huge percentage, is the highest in Italy. And it seems to be somehow stable. You see, it was, in '96, it was 36%, right now it's 30%, slowly decreasing, but still a high number. The point is that this kind of vision of the industrial city is no more fashionable from a long time. And also it's interesting, just to give you some glimpse of the idea of the imaginary surrounding city. Another cultural product we can see are different from postcards are movies. Old Italian movies. Turin has always been, in movies, the ideal setting for sad stories about marginality, crime, immigration. That was the kind, the equivalent of, I suppose, Glasgow, for example, in English movies, and many possible examples. And things, anyway, change a lot, and I don't want you to propose, of course, a strict evaluation has been a good or a bad transformation. As every transformation developed into new forms of marginality, exclusion, we can have a critical vision about everything. Just two signs of this change. These used to be two very important landmark buildings for the industrial identity of the city. The one in the upper part of the picture is Lingotto. Lingotto used to be the first manufacturing plant of Fiat that's close to the city center, and it's also aesthetically very similar to the headquarters of the Ford factories in Detroit, because it has been really a sort of mobility of this kind of aesthetical building. It has been complete. Now there is, from a long time, there is no more production inside that building. It has been totally converted into a kind of postmodern space of consumption. There is a shopping mall, but also a little bit of creative economy, a little bit of experience economy. There is nothing as a testifying, or almost nothing testifying the industrial heritage of that place. It has been completely removed, or at least there has been an explicit attempt to remove that kind of sad, or anyway, unwanted industrial heritage of the city. The other building is a huge production plant that is called Mirafiori. That's not in the city center, that's a bit outside. That's huge because it has been constructed by Fiat during the economic boom after the Second World War. And it has been built in the period of maximus expansion of Fiat, and it has been built 4 times the sites actually needed by Fiat. So that's huge. I've done a research about that some years ago. Even Fiat doesn't know exactly what's inside Mirafiori. And now it's basically empty. There are some discussion about what to do, how to use that as a strategical asset for the city. But anyway, right now, that's some sort of empty space on the periphery of the city. And it used to be a very important element, for example, in discourses about the working class. It was a very lively political stage, for example, space of political discussions. Now, very briefly, in 2 minutes, 5 minutes, here is the main evolution of image building, the kind of images proposed by the city since the crisis of the Fordist crisis. And why I start with the Fordist crisis? But the whole history of image building in Turin may be strongly connected to the history of the crisis of Fiat. The push towards searching new images, new identities for the city has always been stronger during the periods of economic crisis, during the periods of crisis of Fiat car manufacturing. And particularly, the first movement has been a very symbolic movement at the beginning of the 80s, when, for the first time, Fiat fired some people, some workers, because of economic problems. And a huge manifestation took place in the streets of the city. And there's been the moment where a sort of social pact has been broken down, because Fiat was everything for the city up to some years ago. When I was young, for example, I'm the son of a Fiat worker. I used to receive every Christmas a present from Fiat. I used to go to the factory when there was a queue. I received really a sort of paternalistic attitude by Fiat toward people. And this kind of crisis totally changed the perception, the kind of attitude of inhabitants toward the city. And the story of image building started. Particularly at the beginning of the 80s, the first cultural institution in the city, which, by the way, the main one was Fondazione Agnelli, so again, we are always connected to Fiat, started seriously thinking about what can be Turin in the hypothetical case Fiat will collapse, will close down. And the first attempts in image building has been somehow shy. The idea was, well, we can try to live without Fiat, but there is no way we can be something different from a manufacturing city. So the first vision was the idea of a mechatronic city, which means a city of mechanics, and always building on that kind of industrial heritage. It was car manufacturing was the core specialization. But I'm going quite fast. It became, particularly during the 90s, it became quite clear that it was not just a crisis of Fiat. It was a crisis of the entire car manufacturing industry in Europe, particularly in that period, because, of course, the saturation of the markets and many other elements led to a huge crisis. And so Turin started to what Doreen Massey called high-tech fantasies. Turin changed orientation and started trying to become a technopole, as every other one company town around Europe. And, well, of course, we got some assets, the Polytechnic, etc., but it was, people started dreaming of becoming some sort of Italian Silicon Valley, and it was impossible. And the two images on the bottom, on the left, are two iconic pictures about the many possible. Have you ever heard of Vitaminic? Vitaminic was extremely, extremely, extremely famous at the end of the 90s. Really, really famous for about 5 days, 6 days. It was, you know, Napster, Emule, that kind of file-sharing system for downloading MP3 music. It was one of the first ones, and was connected to an entrepreneurial project. It has been invented by an engineer in Turin, which was highly celebrated as a sort of new hero that will bring Turin to that kind of internet age. Well, of course, you know how these things work. Everyone has forgotten about Vitaminic. Or the other one is a picture that has been used in order to advertise the city on a full page of The Economist. It costs a lot of money to put a page like this on The Economist. I just got the Italian version, but it was in English. And the writing is, Motorola gives wings to Turin, because Motorola decided to open a research center in Turin. And everyone was happy, and it was a sort of, it nurtured a sort of story like, well, we don't do cars anymore, but we are able, make high technology, mobile phones, etc. And the research center has been closed after a few years again. But it gives really the idea of the salvific idea of technology, the kind of big logo that looks like the Batman logo standing over the city. It will save us. And then it was really a proliferation of parallel, even hysteric attempts to try to find a new identity. And then the Olympic Games, the mega event, and all the boosterism connected to events which has been the capacity to attract the event has been again produced mainly by the Agnelli family. Again, it was very strong connected to the old industrial heritage of the city. But again, it allowed to develop a new image. And in 1999, Turin discovered that it was going to host the Olympic game in 2006. And the main branding message convoyed by Turin, by Armando Testa, the main important advertising agency, was Turin always on the move. The idea was Turin is not anymore the old one. It's something different, no matter what. It's another thing. Just to get rid of the stigma, we are not anymore the old industrial city. And what are exactly, if we are not the old industrial city? Well, of course, we have, in that period, it was the period of the creative city, or European version, cultural city hype. So Turin, I will spend some words about that later, basically has been turned into a typical stereotype of the creative city. That means culture, consumption, events. Then the events finished, the Winter Olympic Games finished, and what now? Some desperate search for other events, which were, of course, minor events compared to the Winter Olympic Games. So we have the Fence Championship, the chess competition, some kind of small event. Anyway, whatever is good. And then a turning point, again, is the crisis. And the crisis changed everything, and in many ways. Now, what is the kind of creative city imaginary? I have done some visual research about that, but here are just a sample of new images. Well, that's a place where you can hang out and have a lot of fun, which is totally, completely surprising for people, for someone born into, I mean, up to 20 years ago, there was not at all, for example, a playscape, a neighborhood for clubs, and it has been completely invented during the transformation after the games. That's, again, there are many also gentrification effects, but I'm sure I don't have time to speak about that. Some, we call from some hierarchy stars to build some supposed to be highly recognizable buildings, which with mixed success, and events. We have mega events connected to chocolate, books, whatever, but I'm going to discuss about it. Everything reframed in terms of culture, because culture is the keyword. We don't have a mega events for playing chocolate. We celebrate the culture of chocolate. So how to consume chocolate in a cosmopolitan way, and how to produce chocolate with a strong sense of the heritage, etc., etc., etc. And the Winter Olympic Games, okay. Now, just to go shortly to the second part, to the final part of the story, something strange happened, and something completely unexpected. That is the economic crisis. Generally, we say the economic crisis started, the global economic crisis started in 2008, but it arrived a bit later in Italy, and particularly in Turin. It arrived in 2010, and it was completely out of the perspectives of every inhabitant and policymaker in Turin. Why? For two reasons. Turin, on the one hand, used to be considered a sort of stronghold, at least in the Italian landscape, of welfare and social security. It means even in 2006, for example, it was unemployment rate has been always been somehow low for the Italian standard, something like 4%. In 2006, it was 4.1%. Right now, it's almost 12%. And So it was unexpected because the common rhetoric was, we got industrial crisis, but we are somehow resilient. And the other thing was precisely the hype of the games, because here are some, on the bottom part of the image, some quotations from surveys. Everyone, the level of enthusiasm for hosting the games, having the games, the kind of discourse, the games will put again, Winter Olympic Games will put us again on the world map, has been really, really important. And the level of consensus was incredible. This was before the Athens Games, the London Games, the kind of critical discourse, which is quite now very common, and Rome retiring the bid is a very important example. So the level of consensus, I mean, in every city hosting the game, there is always a no Olympic committee and people struggling against the event. There was almost nothing like that in Turin. And what was 80% of the people say the project was going to make great things, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone was convinced that great outcomes in economic terms were going to arrive in Turin. Turin was going to be a city of tourism. Well, of course, Turin raised, but not so much to become the kind of employment for ordinary people, for most people in the city. And particularly, well, according to many observers, it's because of the games. According to other observers, that's for other reasons. But we are basically the highly indebted city in Italy. We are competing with Milan in this sense, but Milan hosted again another mega event, the Expo. So maybe mega events really are one of the reasons because of this huge level of debt that is almost 3,500 euros per inhabitant. That's a lot. Now, in this kind, so in 2010, the crisis and another major or minor event, a highly symbolic event, that in 2014, 2 years ago, Fiat Chrysler, you know Fiat merged with Chrysler, and then the headquarters of Fiat moved away from the city. Definitely over. The sort of pact between the city moved to London and Amsterdam. There is no more Fiat. There are, of course, many people working for Fiat, but the headquarters is not more here. And also the promise of a city becoming a city of culture become more and more ephemeral because, for example, you know, people working in the cultural sector are particularly exposed to self-entrepreneurial jobs and many people lost their jobs. And there has been also a highly symbolic demonstration of people working in the cultural sector saying, we cannot work anymore. What about us? You promised us to be the new engines of the economy. And what about now? So, what to do in such a situation? Well, it's interesting. And how much time? Okay, I'm going. 1 minute. Okay. Sorry? 2 minutes. Okay. Again, that's a story of selective storytelling and invisibility. Things that used to be completely invisible and out of place in the industrial city up to a few years ago has been reinvented in order to desperately try to diversify the economic basis. One example among the many possible, urban gardening. You know, it's quite fashionable and creative, and that's a good thing to have urban gardening. We have a lot of urban gardening in the city. The city hall desperately tried to close these fucking horrible gardens for dozens of years because the main narrative was there is no place for urban gardening in a serious, modern, industrial city. So they tried to remove that. And then as a sudden, has been reinvented as now there are many events and celebration of urban gardening. And again, food. For example, the most poor region of Piedmont around was Roeso was considered poor because it was not industrial area in the region, and it was just an area of agriculture, which is, of course, considered low value. But with the crisis of the industry, it has been reinvented as a region, a place for high-quality food and wine, and it has been also reframed from poor to rich region. And again, the example of cinema. It used to be a city of cinema before fascism, and then Mussolini moved cinema production to Rome for many reasons. But somehow, it has been from the years an important city for debates about cinema. But no one cares about cinema. Again, it has been reinvented as a city of cinema. This means many things. For example, that variety may be connected to resilience from a theoretical perspective. But again, it's interesting the political exercise of moving the industrial to the regime of invisibility and other things to the regime of visibility. Well, okay, I have to conclude. There is a sort of internal collapse right now, because these kind of images, the images of the happy, creative city attracting tourists and providing very good wine and the land, it's totally in contrast with the idea, with the actual experience of life of the many poor people living in the city. So that kind of image is good to be proposed to sell the city outside, but it's not good to be proposed inside the city. Inside the city, you need another narrative. And right now, the kind of narrative that you use is the one of the smart city. Technologies, again, will save us. And I have to conclude here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for a very rich